A simple woman was publicly humiliated and accused of stealing, until her billionaire husband walked in and shut the entire store down. A modestly dressed woman walked into a luxury fashion boutique, alone, quiet, unnoticed. Within minutes, she was mocked, ignored, and humiliated. Staff rolled their eyes. Customers whispered insults. One manager even accused her of trying to steal. What no one knew was that her husband was Damon Armstrong, the billionaire investor who could bankrupt companies with a single call. And when he walked through those glass doors, calm but furious, everything changed. By the next morning, the entire boutique chain collapsed, liquidated, blacklisted, and gone. All because they disrespected the wrong woman. Charlotte walked into the luxurious fashion boutique with hesitant steps, hoping to find a new outfit for an upcoming charity dinner. The moment she stepped inside, the store's signature perfume assaulted her senses, and every sparkling display showcased one flamboyant design after another. She moved slowly, scanning the rows of intricately stitched dresses and suits. But within seconds, she felt a prickly sensation at the back of her neck, as though every person in that store was silently questioning her presence. The first sales associate she approached, a tall woman with sleek hair pinned into a fashionable bun, barely lifted her gaze. Charlotte mustered a polite smile, but the associate turned on her heels, muttering something under her breath about time wasters. Determined not to let such minor discourtesy ruin her day, Charlotte proceeded further inside, only to have another staff member, this one with a forced grin, grab a glitzy garment from her hands the second she touched it. "That item might be out of your budget," he said, in a clipped voice that dripped with condescension. He didn't ask if she needed help. He simply plucked the dress away like removing a fragile object from a child's reckless grip. Charlotte froze, her cheeks turning warm. She rarely shopped at high-end boutiques, and this was precisely the reason why. Although she was married to one of the wealthiest men in the country, she had always preferred simplicity. She favored comfortable clothes, minimal makeup, and genuine interactions. She disliked flaunting money, especially when she felt her husband's fortune wasn't something she personally earned. But wearing a simple outfit, faded jeans, sneakers, and a plain sweater, apparently made her a target in this glitzy world of branded fashion. Another shopper, sporting a designer handbag that probably cost more than a year's rent, paused near Charlotte, looked her up and down, and gave a disapproving click of the tongue. This woman then leaned toward the sales associate, whispering loudly enough for Charlotte to overhear. "Why would someone like her step into an exclusive store like this? She'll never buy anything. She's probably just here to take selfies with expensive clothes." The humiliation made Charlotte's stomach churn. She felt her palms grow clammy, and the urge to leave surged within her. But she tried to remain calm, reasoning that she just wanted one decent outfit for the charity event. She hadn't anticipated that her moneyed husband, Damon, would be traveling until tomorrow, so she decided to shop alone. The moment she thought of him, she imagined how he would have handled the situation. Damon was fierce in protecting her dignity whenever someone disrespected her, yet Charlotte had always believed in handling small rudeness on her own. She wasn't a pushover. She simply valued politeness over confrontation. She preferred turning the other cheek rather than creating a scene. She drew a steady breath, telling herself that this was nothing she couldn't handle. If she let every sneer or sarcastic remark get to her, she would be perpetually irritated. Still, the staff's open disregard was wearing on her. Another moment of tension flared when she approached a display of designer handbags and tried to feel the material of a sleek black purse. Right then, a male employee positioned himself between her and the bag. He looked her up and down, then said, "We have more affordable options in the clearance section. Are you sure you want to look at this one?" His smile was neither warm nor genuine. Charlotte felt a sting at the corners of her eyes, but she forced herself to remain composed. She nodded, quietly thanking him for the suggestion, and stepped away. She overheard him snickering as he joined two other employees, both glancing in her direction with amused curiosity. A more brazen insult came a few minutes later when she tried to approach the counter to inquire about a pair of elegant shoes displayed on the top shelf. Two staff members were chatting with each other, flipping through a glossy magazine and discussing new arrivals. Charlotte waited patiently, then cleared her throat. Neither turned around. She spoke up. "Excuse me, I was wondering if I could try that pair," but before she could even finish, one of them put a manicured finger in the air to silence her. Charlotte's mouth snapped shut. He continued his conversation, ignoring her completely, as though she weren't standing there at all. She inched away, biting the inside of her lip in humiliation. At that point, she noticed several other customers watching, some with pity, others with the same amused scorn. A tall woman in a glittery evening dress, presumably on her way to some extravagant affair, brushed past Charlotte without an apology, swinging her shopping bag so it accidentally struck Charlotte's hip. "Oh, I'm sorry," the woman said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "I didn't see you there." She made a point of glancing at Charlotte's plain sweater, then gave an eye roll that screamed exasperation. The customers within earshot laughed softly, shaking their heads. One of them murmured, "Seriously, people like her lower the tone of the place." Charlotte's heart pounded. She felt annoyance bubbling inside, but she told herself to keep calm. There was no sense in lashing out in front of these people who delighted in seeing her belittled. She had faced subtle mockery before, but never in such a direct, collective manner. She tried not to think about her savings or her personal net worth, let alone Damon's. She refused to flaunt that part of her life, yet, at this moment, she found herself wishing she had at least worn something less unassuming. Perhaps she should have chosen a nice blouse, or carried one of the more expensive purses Damon had gifted her. Maybe then they wouldn't be so quick to dismiss her. But that was never Charlotte's style. She prided herself on authenticity, believing one shouldn't have to prove their worth by dressing a certain way. The tension escalated when she drifted over to a slender, impeccably dressed manager who seemed to be directing the floor staff. He had a measured gait, exuding the air of someone who took pride in running a high-end establishment. Charlotte hoped he might at least talk to her with basic courtesy. She began, "Excuse me, sir. Do you have a moment?" He turned around, eyes scanning her clothes with undisguised judgment. She continued politely, "I'd like to find a classic gown, something elegant but timeless, for a charity event. Do you have any suggestions?" For several seconds, the manager simply stared. Then, folding his arms across his chest, he asked, "Are you certain you have the funds for our merchandise, ma'am? Our gowns start at a certain price point, and, well, I don't want to waste our staff's time if you're just browsing." Charlotte's eyes flickered. She could feel every bit of color drain from her face. If he had expressed it more gently, or even politely, she might have understood. But his words oozed disdain. Rather than confrontation, she chose an apologetic smile. "I understand your concern," she replied softly. "I promise, I'm genuinely interested in making a purchase." Instead of receiving a helpful response, she was met with an exasperated sigh, as though her presence were an inconvenience of the highest order. "Let me see if someone is free," the manager eventually muttered, though he made no move to call for assistance. Feeling increasingly unwelcome, Charlotte waited there a moment longer before she realized he was just going to stand and pretend she didn't exist. The harshness of their collective attitude caused her eyes to sting with unshed tears. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let them see her cry. In the corner of the store, a group of chatty customers started pointing at her shoes, old, comfortable sneakers that she wore for quick errands. Loud giggles erupted when one of them joked, "Maybe she's in the wrong place. They're having a sale at the discount store down the street. She might find something in her budget there." Their laughter sliced through her heart. She wanted to retort, but her good sense prevented it. She wanted to reason that these people didn't know her, that they had no idea who she was or what she could afford. But every bit of her upbringing reminded her not to stoop to their level. A heavy exhaustion washed over her, a mix of shame and anger. She was an adult, a grown woman who had accomplished many things in her life, including philanthropic work, managing her own small business, and supporting various charities. She was proud of her achievements, yet in this store, she was being treated like a nobody. It stung, and she tried to figure out what to do next. Maybe she should just leave. Perhaps the humiliation would end if she simply gave up on buying anything here. But part of her didn't want to retreat under their scornful gazes, as if she were defeated. She wanted to stand her ground, to prove that she had every right to be here. But how could she accomplish that without resorting to bragging or yelling? She decided to approach the main display rack, where a particularly stunning gown made of navy blue satin hung. The price tag was hidden, but Charlotte guessed it would be expensive. Even so, she had come here with a real intention, to buy a dress that made her feel confident at the charity gala. She gently ran her fingers over the fabric, appreciating its soft texture. Suddenly, a woman with an enormous diamond ring on her finger marched up. She was flanked by a young sales lady who had been perfectly attentive the entire time. The customer seized the gown's hanger and snorted when she noticed Charlotte's hand resting on the cloth. "Could you not touch that?" the woman demanded, her eyes gleaming with annoyance. "It's one of the highest-end pieces, and I'd like to try it on. I'd prefer if it remained pristine, not stretched out by random hands." Charlotte's face flushed again. She took a small step back and nodded, trying to maintain politeness. But the woman wasn't finished. "People like you," she scoffed, "should know better than to disrupt those of us who are serious buyers. Go find something on the clearance rack, honey." More laughter erupted from the small group that had gathered around, enthralled by the spectacle. The saleslady, although less overtly hostile, made no effort to correct the rude customer. Instead, she simply handed the gown to the woman, sparing Charlotte a disdainful glance. In that moment, Charlotte felt an overwhelming wave of sadness. She had taught herself to be patient, to remain kind even in the face of unkindness. But the repeated humiliations of the last 30 minutes were eroding her resolve. She contemplated leaving, though she was torn between pride and the raw hurt in her chest. She didn't want to cry in front of them, and she certainly didn't want to beg for service. The store was now brimming with condescending stares. It was as if every individual in that shop had collectively decided she was fair game for their cruel jokes. Her heart pounded so loudly that her ears started to ring, and she forced herself to take steady breaths. Summoning her last bit of composure, Charlotte turned toward the exit. Maybe she would simply come back when Damon returned from his business trip. He would help her find a dress somewhere else, or he could call ahead to schedule a private appointment at another boutique. They had done that before, though Charlotte had never liked drawing attention to herself that way. As she turned on her heel, though, she heard a snide comment from the store manager, who was now chatting with the tall associate who had first turned her away. "That type," he said, "should really know her place. This is no playground for window shoppers who can't afford what we sell." Any hope Charlotte had of leaving in quiet dignity collapsed at that point. The words sliced through her, an unvarnished condemnation of her perceived lack of worth. She stood still for a moment, eyes fixed on the marble floor. She wondered if this was really happening. How could so many people be so callous? Then, as she raised her eyes, she witnessed another clerk deliberately stepping in front of her to rearrange a rack, effectively blocking her path. This forced her to sidestep awkwardly, further highlighting her unwelcome status. Laughter bubbled up around her again, as if her mere presence was entertaining to them. She pressed her lips together, refusing to let them see her tears. Her entire body trembled from the onslaught of contempt. She yearned to speak up, to mention Damon's name, to watch their eyes widen in disbelief. But that would have felt like brandishing power, something she despised. She believed no one should need a powerful spouse's name to earn basic respect. Yet, the more these thoughts raced in her head, the more her emotions swirled. She stared at the polished mannequins near the entrance, each wearing designer garments worth a fortune, each exuding an aura of exclusivity. She was starting to resent not just the people in this store, but the entire pretentious environment. This wasn't just about being turned away. It felt like a statement on how people with fewer outward signs of wealth are deemed worthless in certain circles. Outside, the sky was bright, and the reflection of passers-by glinted against the store's massive glass windows. She took another step toward the door, only to have a final blow land as a group of young women entered, each sporting high-end jewelry and obviously expensive clothes. One of them nearly ran into her and exclaimed, "Whoa! Careful there, sweetie. Don't scuff my shoes with those ragged sneakers." Charlotte clenched her jaw, swallowing back words that threatened to spill out in anger. Even as she tried to navigate around them, they shared a round of smug giggles. Another staff member at the door gave Charlotte a look that said, "Are you still here?" She wanted nothing more than to vanish from their sight. Her hand pushed against the glass door, and a blast of fresh air hit her face. The day outside was perfectly pleasant, the sun warming the sidewalk, but her mood felt like a dark storm cloud had settled over her. She didn't bother to look back. Instead, she dashed a few steps away from the entrance, found a quiet spot near a potted plant, and tried to steady herself. She inhaled deeply, staring at the cars passing by on the street, as if normal life continued uninterrupted while she wrestled with her distress. She felt a little foolish for letting their words affect her so deeply, yet she couldn't deny the sting of the utter contempt she had encountered. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She retrieved it, blinking at the screen to see an incoming call from Damon. A flicker of relief washed over her. She pressed the phone to her ear, her voice shaky with pent-up emotion. "Hey, you." Damon's warm tone greeted her. "I just wrapped up my meeting. You doing okay?" Charlotte tried to keep her voice from trembling. "I'm fine. Just out running errands." She heard him pause on the other line, a subtle sign that he sensed something was off. "Charlotte, talk to me. You sound upset." She glanced back at the store entrance, recalling every hateful look and cruel word. Her chest tightened. She didn't want to bother him with this, especially if he was busy with his own obligations. But the wave of emotions made it hard for her to sound casual. "It's nothing, really. Just had a run-in with some rude salespeople." Damon's voice deepened, concern evident in every syllable. "Which store?" he asked calmly. Charlotte hesitated, but eventually gave him the name. She heard him exhale sharply. "Did something happen? Because I can tell you're not your usual self." Charlotte tried to brush it off. "It was just a misunderstanding. I was looking for a dress, and I guess I didn't look like I belonged there. Let's not worry about it." Damon fell silent for a few seconds, then said, "Honey, I don't want you feeling like this. I'm wrapping up earlier than expected. I'll be back tonight, not tomorrow. If you can hold on a bit, I'd like to come and see you." The steadiness of his voice offered a promise of protection. Even though she disliked the idea of him swooping in to fix everything, she couldn't deny how safe it made her feel. She whispered, "Okay, let me know when you're here." She ended the call and pressed the phone against her chest, trying to quell the roller coaster of emotions. A small part of her worried that Damon might overreact if he heard the full story. He was fiercely protective of her and despised snobbery more than anything. She stood there for a while, not sure if she should linger or just head home. But a nagging sense of injustice kept her rooted in place. Why should she run off, tail between her legs, while those people laughed about her? After a few minutes, she decided to re-enter the store and try to resolve at least some of her business on her own terms, even if it meant enduring more ridicule. She hoped maybe, just maybe, one kind soul might help her find a dress, or at least treat her decently. With a burst of fragile determination, she pulled open the door again. The inside looked just as glimmering as before. But the moment she crossed the threshold, several pairs of eyes flicked to her, as if to say, "Why are you back?" She squared her shoulders and walked toward a rack in a far corner, scanning it for something appropriate for a formal event. She found a modest black dress with lace accents, delicate enough that it could potentially fit her preference for understated elegance. She checked the price tag, and while it was steep, she knew it wasn't beyond her means. But the moment she lifted it off the rack, a sales associate swooped in and offered a patronizing smirk. "We have layaway options," she said in a syrupy voice, "in case you're interested." Charlotte breathed in quietly. She had no interest in bragging or picking a fight, so she simply replied, "That's quite all right. I can pay for it." The associate gave a small laugh, clearly not believing her. "Well, good for you," she responded, already moving away as though there was nothing more to discuss. Behind Charlotte, the tall manager she had spoken to earlier approached, looking irritated. He rested a hand on his hip. "Ma'am, you were leaving earlier. Are you certain there's something you can afford here? We don't tolerate loitering." Charlotte's temper flared, but she maintained her composed exterior. "I'm not loitering. I would like to try on this dress." She held up the black lace dress. The manager made a face, then slowly nodded to a nearby junior staff member who trudged forward to escort Charlotte to the fitting room. The next few moments were a blur of awkwardness. The staff member tossed the dress onto a hook in the changing stall and muttered, "Let me know if you need anything," with a tone that implied she hoped Charlotte needed nothing at all. Inside the fitting room, Charlotte slipped off her sweater and jeans, carefully stepping into the dress. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and realized that despite its simplicity, the design flattered her figure. For a second, she felt a slight boost in confidence. But as soon as she stepped out to see the dress in better lighting, she was met with more hushed giggles from two sales associates standing by. They offered no compliment, no assistance, just thinly veiled scorn. One of them mocked, "That's a lovely funeral dress," under her breath, loud enough for Charlotte to hear. Her hand tightened around the fitting room curtain. She felt an overwhelming desire to walk out and never come back. But something in her refused to yield to their bullying. She decided right then that she would purchase this dress, no matter how they judged her. With a trembling voice, she said to the associate, "I'll take it." The associate's eyes widened, then narrowed in suspicion. "Are you sure?" she asked. Charlotte gave a firm nod. "Yes, I'm sure." The associate shrugged, as if to say, "Your funeral," and motioned for Charlotte to change back into her clothes. Upon returning to the sales floor, Charlotte clung to the black dress with quiet resolve. She approached the register, only to find that the cashier wouldn't meet her gaze. The man behind the counter glanced at the dress, tapped the price into the system, and said the total out loud, in a voice meant to shock her. "That will be $4,950. Charlotte reached into her purse, pulling out a sleek black credit card. The cashier's eyebrows shot up, but he still wore a condescending grin. "I'm sorry, but we'll need to see some identification." She handed over her ID without complaint, ignoring the snickers around her. He examined it, cast a glance from the photo to her face, then sighed theatrically. "I'll have to verify this with the manager. Please wait here." Charlotte stood waiting while the manager strolled over, inspected her ID, and whispered in the cashier's ear. She couldn't hear every word, but she caught phrases like fraud and "we can't be too careful." Meanwhile, other customers looked on, some sipping bottles of fancy mineral water provided by the store. One wealthy couple in matching designer outfits shook their heads in disbelief, as if appalled that someone like Charlotte would attempt to make a purchase. Finally, the manager handed the ID back to the cashier, who returned to the register. "We'll try running the card," he said, and there was an unmistakable challenge in his voice. He swiped it, paused, then stared at the screen. There was a noticeable flicker in his composure as the transaction approved. Charlotte kept her expression neutral. He handed back her card and ID, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your purchase was successful," he declared flatly. He printed the receipt and begrudgingly passed it to her for a signature. Before she could put pen to paper, however, she heard the manager blurt out to the cashier, "Did you confirm she has enough on that card?" The cashier shrugged. "The system says approved. Not much we can do." Grudgingly, he slid the receipt over. Charlotte signed, feeling the tension in the air like an electric current. She handed the receipt back, half expecting them to accuse her of something else. Instead, the manager whispered something to a staff member who rushed off. Charlotte guessed they were double-checking her card's authenticity. She remained calm, finishing the transaction, then carefully took the bag with the dress inside. As she turned to leave, a small group of customers, obviously disappointed that she had actually managed to buy something, sneered at her. One woman in a bright red designer jacket said, loud enough for Charlotte to hear, "Probably maxed out her credit limit for the year." Another man chimed in, "She'll be returning that within a week when she realizes she can't pay her bills." Their mocking voices felt like needles, each prick reminding Charlotte how cruel some people could be. Her shoulders tensed, but she quietly stepped toward the door, bag in hand, intending to exit with at least a shred of dignity. However, just as she neared the exit, a snide voice boomed behind her. "Ma'am, hold on." It was the manager again, pointing accusingly. She turned around, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. "We need to search your bag," he stated harshly. Her face twisted in confusion. "What? Wait," he huffed. "We have reason to believe you might have taken an accessory without paying." Shock waves rippled through her. She had done no such thing. The manager's eyes glittered with suspicion, or perhaps malicious satisfaction. "We noticed you looking at handbags earlier, and one of them is missing from the display." Charlotte felt as though she'd been slapped. Customers gathered around, forming a circle. Some had their phones out, recording or snapping pictures, hoping to capture the moment of her humiliation. She held out her shopping bag, voice trembling with shock and anger. "I didn't take anything," she said firmly, but the manager snatched the bag, rummaging through the tissue paper. He found nothing but the black dress. Then he asked her to empty her purse. Charlotte complied, pulling out her wallet, keys, and phone. No stolen item was found. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Some looked almost disappointed that there wasn't a dramatic shoplifting arrest. The manager scowled as if the lack of evidence irritated him. Instead of apologizing, he snapped, "Security cameras will confirm everything. If you're clear, you can go." Charlotte's throat went dry. She desperately wanted to defend herself, but she felt so emotionally battered that words failed her. She glanced around at the smirking faces, her lips quivering. She was about to respond when the boutique's front door swung open with force, making a loud clunk against the doorstop. Heads whipped around to see a tall figure step inside. Damon had arrived. He stood at the boutique entrance in a tailored black suit, his presence instantly drawing the attention of everyone inside. Damon Armstrong wasn't just any man. He was one of the wealthiest and most influential investors in the country. A billionaire known for both his business acumen and his fierce protection of family. Every person in that store, from the arrogant manager to the sneering customers, knew exactly who he was, and their smug expressions dissolved immediately. His sharp gaze swiftly found Charlotte, surrounded and humiliated, fighting to keep her dignity intact. Damon's eyes narrowed dangerously as he crossed the floor with deliberate steps. "Charlotte," he called softly, but his voice resonated with authority. She turned toward him, relief washing visibly across her face. He placed a protective arm around her shoulders, gently pulling her close before turning his attention back to the manager, who had suddenly gone pale and silent. "Would someone care to explain to me what's going on here?" Damon's voice was calm, yet the underlying fury was unmistakable. The manager stumbled over his words. "Mr. Armstrong, sir, there was a misunderstanding. We suspected shoplifting, but—" Damon raised a hand sharply, cutting him off. "Shoplifting? You openly accused my wife of theft without a shred of evidence?" The manager swallowed nervously, attempting a weak justification. We have strict store policies, and her appearance. Damon's voice became icy, his words slicing through the air. Her appearance? So you humiliated Charlotte publicly, allowed your staff and your customers to degrade her based solely on how she looked? Do you have any idea who this woman is? Not just my wife, but a respected philanthropist who has done more good for this community in a single year than your entire brand has in its existence. The manager shrank back, eyes darting nervously between Damon and Charlotte. Employees who had mocked Charlotte moments earlier were now standing silent, their faces a mixture of fear and embarrassment. The wealthy customers who had gleefully ridiculed her exchanged horrified glances, realizing the gravity of their mistake. Damon slowly surveyed the room, making deliberate eye contact with each guilty face. You've built your entire business model on catering exclusively to the wealthy. And yet, here stands someone who can afford anything in your store 100 times over. But you chose to shame her because she didn't flaunt her wealth like some meaningless badge of honor. Silence filled the boutique. No one dared speak as Damon continued, quietly intense. Let me make something perfectly clear. The value of a person isn't determined by how they dress or how much money you think they have. Your arrogant assumptions have consequences. His words hung heavily in the air. Several employees looked down, visibly shaken, fully aware Damon Armstrong had the power to ruin careers with a single phone call. Even the previously haughty customers who had mocked Charlotte now avoided his gaze, shamefaced and anxious. Damon gently squeezed Charlotte's shoulder, leaning in to softly ask, "Are you all right?" She nodded quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am now." Satisfied, Damon turned back to the manager for one final warning. "You will be hearing from my attorneys. And trust me, your corporate office will understand exactly what happens when anyone treats my wife, or anyone else, this poorly. I guarantee it won't end well for you." With that, he carefully guided Charlotte out of the store. The silence left behind was deafening. The following day, the luxury boutique chain experienced swift, brutal consequences. Headlines briefly captured the chaos. Damon Armstrong had pulled his massive investments, triggering panic and collapse throughout the company. Within hours, the entire business faced insolvency, becoming an immediate cautionary tale of arrogance and discrimination. Charlotte didn't revel in their misfortune, but she felt relieved that perhaps justice had finally caught up with them. Damon simply held her close, assuring her that he'd always be there to protect her, no matter what. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more intriguing tales and powerful life lessons.